Like animals.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to change the things out there. So Thor got the 14 month, which means they have to have her position, but they're also suffering in the office. So she's trying to do it should be hard. I mean, I could still give you the information. I really enjoy that. Like, which means I get my 9 hours. No problem. For my 4 days a week, right? Then I work for my lunch, so I can count that. Yeah, but then I can come back to the office and stuff. I used to do that. I could wait for a shift and come back.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Again, you've probably been through these announcements several times. If you have not gone out of this room and checked back in between the presentations, please do so. Please remember to wear your masks. That means over your nose and mouth. Also, if you have COVID symptoms, please go home and let your program manager know. I'm pleased to present Dr. Kersti Spujdt. She's a licensed psychologist who works with an assistant clinical professor at BYU Counseling and Psychological Services, as well as running her own private practice. She specializes in sexual health, perfectionism, and anxiety, and she's under supervision to become a certified sex therapist. Outside of work, Dr. Spujdt enjoys baking, camping, and spending time with family. Please join in welcoming.
Okay, so they told me I can take off my mask. If anyone in front is uncomfortable, I will not be offended if you move. I am fully vaccinated. This is the first time I've been in public without a mask on at all since the pandemic started. So
Sorry to hear that.
thank you. I saw someone applauding for me. I'm really proud. So okay. Also, let me know if the mic is too loud, too soft. I can move it back and forth. So, here we go. This is me. I'm here because I love ACT. It's not the only theoretical orientation that I use, but it's probably the main one that I use at this point. As was mentioned, I work at BYU. I work at the counseling center there, where I'm a clinical professor. So part of my job is seeing BYU students. So I work a lot with young adults with a variety of concerns. And then I also have a very small private practice, just me, where I see a few clients after hours and I see kids through young adults. So that's kind of the populations that I work with. As was mentioned, my name is Kersti, like Care Bear. My last name is Spujdt, and it rhymes with cute. So you have all the mnemonics that you need. Okay. So one other thing. I am diabetic, so I have a little blood sugar reader. I might check my sugar on this little white thing on my arm. So I'm not like checking my text messages or anything. That's just, hopefully we'll be good, but just in case. All right, so today, I wanted today to be a little bit more experiential rather than just talking you through a bunch of theory. And that's because ACT is experiential. That's the purpose of it. That's the main way it's to be administered to clients. So I wanted to check in first who we've got in the room. So if you are a provider of mental health services to clients, will you raise your hand? Just so okay, you're not, I know that. That's my husband, he's here for something later. Okay, if you are not a mental health provider, direct face-to-face services, raise your hand. Got a couple. Okay, awesome. That helps me know how to target my thoughts here today. So for each of you, during this presentation, if you have paper or if you have a phone or computer with a notes section, please take that out because I want you to be able to write down some things as we go. You don't have to share them with anyone unless you want to. But I want you to start by thinking of some kind of problem, some area of distress. This can be, if you want to go personal, think of something you're struggling with. If you've got a client who's stuck on something, you could use them for the exercises we'll do today. Here's some examples if you're feeling stuck. So maybe shame about something. Maybe there's a habit or a behavior or something that you did in the past that you have a lot of regret or shame about. And no matter what you do, no matter how much you change, the shame is still there. Right? Maybe body image struggles. Right? These can be quite long lasting. Maybe fear, maybe stress, maybe anxiety, maybe depression, any kind of mental health concern. Maybe grief. A lot of us have been touched by grief in the last year. Right? And so maybe there's a sense of nothing I do makes me feel any better. So I'll give you a second. Write down your concern or your client's concern. Think about how much time has passed with that concern. Okay. And now you're going to jot down, what have you tried? Okay. Everything that you've done, or maybe things you've been told to do that you haven't tried yet, to deal with, to get rid of, to eliminate that issue. Okay, so again, here's some examples. Maybe you've tried pushing it down. Right? This can take lots of forms, some more healthy than others, right? Netflix is one of my favorites. When I'm dealing with anxiety, I would much rather just watch a horror movie and then my life looks better. So I push it down, right? We try to numb it maybe with substances, maybe with relationships, anything we do to try and kind of shove it down, force ourselves to smile, fake it till you make it. Right? Maybe you've tried various self-help books, maybe you've tried therapy for this, right? If your client is who you're thinking about, they are in therapy, right? And they're still here because it hasn't fixed it for them yet, right? Something we see a lot in this area is religious practices. Maybe you've tried praying or fasting or meditating or doing some sort of religious devotion. Or maybe people have told you to do that, and it hasn't been helpful. Right? So you're listing everything that you've tried. When we do this, so one of the main, venues where I use ACT on a regular basis is at BYU. We have a series of groups called Sexual Concerns, and it's for individuals who are engaging in sexual behaviors that go against their values. They're really distressed by them, so pornography, sexual imagery, masturbation, sexting, stuff like that. And they've tried everything, right? And they're still doing this behavior. They still haven't found a way to quit it. So the very first session of the group, we do this, and we write everything on a whiteboard, and it fills the whiteboard every time. Right? These folks are dedicated. They have really tried. All right. And then the last part is, what have these efforts cost you or cost your client? And once we write down this one, we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. So think about all of the things, and cost doesn't have to mean negative necessarily. It's just, what are the things you've given up in exchange for these efforts? Right? Maybe time, maybe energy or effort, money, right? Books, therapy, groups, right? There's a financial cost. And then you can also just think of any opportunity cost. What are the activities, the relationships, the skills, the adventures that you have not been able to invest in while you're investing in trying to get rid of this problem? I think this one's the hardest to think of. Right, so some examples might be the time that I'm spending on Netflix. I could be spending sleeping. So I've missed sleep because I've wanted to numb my anxiety. I'd rather do that than have to face it and go to sleep. Right, laying in bed for a few moments having nothing but my thoughts. That's painful. I could spend that time with my family. I'm married, I have a stepson, we like to do lots of fun things together. But there's plenty of times I can think of when I've missed out on family activities because I was too anxious. And I felt like I needed to get rid of my anxiety first before I could engage. So just a few examples. The individuals I work with in the sexual concerns groups, a lot of their costs have to do with things that ecclesiastical leaders have asked them to give up. Right? And a lot of them often get contradicting advice depending on which bishop they go to. Some bishops say don't date, some say do date, some say don't go to the temple, some say do go to the temple. Right? So there's, as you look at your list, there might even be things that contradict, right? Strategies you've tried and the costs that come along with it. Okay. And now I want you to just kind of look at everything you've written down, reflect on it, think about what's worked, what hasn't, what do you notice as you look at this list of things, or if you're doing this for a client, put yourself in their shoes. What's it like to look back on your life? See this problem that's not going away, see everything you've tried and everything it's cost you, and recognizing that the problem is still here, even despite all of that. Okay. And I'd love to hear if there's comments, reactions, or questions if you have them. Let's take a couple minutes and get reactions. What do you notice as you look at this list? Another good question to ask is what feelings come up? Do you feel hopeful? Do you feel hopeless? Do you feel overwhelmed? Yeah, in the back, shout it out.
Frustration.
Frustration. Good. Yes.
Exhaustion.
Exhaustion. Yeah. Yes.
Resourceful.
Resourceful. Nice. Yep.
Discouragement.
Discouragement. Yeah. Any other reactions or observations? Yes.
It takes a toll on your health.
Yeah, noticing the toll it takes on your health. That's a really good one, and something that we often neglect. I think in our society, health is sort of sacrificed to the gods of productivity. Right? We have to be productive at all costs. Good. Any others? Yes.
I noticed that there are some things that make me feel happy and some things that make me feel sad. It's like I'm holding opposites, kind of. Like I've gained a lot, I progress, but there's still, the problem is still there. So like I guess I gained some inner strength, but I'm still sad about the problem.
Great. Hopefully you can all hear that. I'll try to rephrase it, but just this idea that there's a lot of happiness and sadness. Like there's two sides to reflecting on this. There may be things that you've tried that have brought you a lot of meaning, development, relationships, growth, personal awareness. There may be things you've tried that have cost you things, and maybe those are the same things. Right? And so noticing, there's no wrong answers here. Just noticing. The big question for ACT is always, how's that working for you? If something is working for you, if something's working for one of my clients, and it's not costing them more than it's giving them, great. There's no right or wrong answers. There's no morality in ACT, which other than the values that you identify, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so keep this in mind, right? We'll keep reflecting back on this problem, but I want to do a couple metaphors first, all right? So we're going to start with this one. I want you to imagine your dream house, okay? So you have made it. You found the place that you want to stay forever. And for the purpose of this example, we're also going to assume that you like the outdoors and you like gardening, okay? So there's a lot of property, beautiful landscapes. You get to grow whatever it is that you want to grow. Or maybe there's a pool outside, whatever it is that you like to do outside. So you have your house, you have your property. Really picture it. This is like, you've waited forever for this. You've made it, and you're so proud, and you're so happy to be here, and you're looking forward to just spending your days enjoying your time, growing those strawberries, whatever it is. Okay, so in the yard, you're out working one day and you start to hear somebody or something yelling, right? And it somehow knows all of your pet peeves, right? So if it's a certain type of voice, if it's a certain comment, maybe it's chewing loudly, whatever bugs you the most, this thing is doing it. It's yelling your insecurities at you. It knows every mistake you've ever made, all of your fears. It's just bringing it to your awareness constantly. You look around, and in the sort of distance, you see at the edge of your property, there's actually a ravine, and it's so deep you can't see the bottom of it. And it's probably about as far as me to the podium. So however many feet that is, I'm not good at estimating things like that. But you see across this ravine, there is a monster. It's some sort of ogre creature monster, and this is the thing that's been yelling at you. And it will not stop. And so you try asking nicely, hey, will you please stop? You try yelling back. You try drowning it out. You try everything. It will not stop. It's not going to leave you alone. And so dejected, you're like, what can I do? You're ruining my dream. This is the life that I've worked for and waited for and saved for. And you're ruining my dream. Is there anything that will make you stop? And the monster says, actually, yes, I have an offer for you. And it tosses over a rope. And it says, let's try tug of war. Okay? I'm going to pull, you're going to pull. And if I win, then I get to keep going. If you win, then I'll stop. If you win the tug of war, if you win the struggle, then I will stop forever. I'll never say those things to you again. You can live your life in peace with no interruptions, no issues whatsoever. And you think, well, I've tried everything else, so I might as well give this a go. So you pick up the rope, and you start with some confidence, right? You're like actually gaining a little bit of ground, but you realize the monster's been going easy on you. It's much bigger and stronger than you are, and it starts to pull for real. And you do that thing where your heels are like sliding in the dirt, and your hands are white knuckled, and they hurt, and you're getting rug burn. You're getting inching closer and closer to the ravine, right? Bottomless. So deep, we don't even know what's at the bottom, right? So what do you do as you get closer and closer to the edge? What do you do? Someone shout it out. Let go. Great. You let go of the rope. But doesn't that mean the monster wins? Isn't it going to keep yelling at you? Yeah, it does. You lost the struggle with this monster. Right? But with the rope dropped, your hands are now free. Right? You're not getting rug burn. You're not getting inching closer and closer to your death. Okay. So anytime we use a metaphor in ACT, I think it's really helpful to let the client, let the individual try and interpret it, because what I found is that what I think will land with someone isn't usually what lands, right? As individuals, we have a pretty good intuition of what lesson we need to learn or how this might apply. So I want to check in with you. What are some connections, some meanings, some interpretations of this metaphor that are coming up for you? What's the monster? What's the rope? Yes, please.
If I let go of the rope, I'm free to do something else.
Great. If I let go of the rope, I'm free to do something else. And then your wheels start turning. What would that be? And we'll come back to that. Yes?
So if I let go, the monster will like fall in.
There's a chance the monster might be so surprised by it that it'll lose balance and tumble in. So that we still have hope of getting rid of the monster. Relatable. Okay. Others? In the very back.
There's a lot of pain and energy and effort with like consulting for trying to stop the monsters, so I might as well accept that I can't stop it, and then like someone else said, go on my hands spiritual with my life and try to live with the background noise.
Great. So noticing how much pain, energy, effort is going to fighting the monster, and being able to notice where you can spend that energy and effort instead. There was another hand I saw. Yes.
I think about my clients who are often suicidal and that they would just jump into the ravine.
Yeah. Sometimes it really pulls you to the brink and you feel like jumping. It feels like, what is the point if I can't get rid of the monster? Awesome. Others, yes.
I can't help but think, because I work with trauma in our youth, and we talk about how, negative self-talk and negative core beliefs, right? I'm thinking of that fighting with the monster. And we teach them to learn how to, in an acceptance of a way, but to talk to and acknowledge it, but not have to give it all their power. And so it's like, okay, you're there, I see you, but I'm gonna go do this right now, or and just acknowledging it instead of, because of all the energy, like was mentioned earlier about the rejection and the fight, to where acknowledgement helps alleviate the loudness that the monster would create.
Great. So acknowledging what dropping the rope means is, I see you, I accept that you're there, I don't have to like you, but I can find a way to make space for it. And that fits really well with trauma. We cannot change whatever trauma has happened to us. We can change the way we relate with it, and getting into a tug of war with it, trying to make something not there that is there, trying to undo something from the past, is this tug of war where we always lose because we're less powerful than the force of time, right? We can't go back in time. Okay. I've got one more activity that I'm gonna do, and for this, I'm gonna have Justin Dublitz, everyone. Round of applause. Okay, this is my husband, so we're safe to be in a bubble together. Okay, will you bring a chair? And let's set it down so that you would be facing me if you were sitting in it, but stand in front of it. Maybe bring it a little closer so it's a little more centered. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to explain what we're going to do and then set down the mic because I need to use both hands. So, and he doesn't know what's coming actually. I realize I haven't explained to him. Okay, so I'm going to try to knock you over. Okay, if you're doing this with clients, which I do this with clients, always get consent, always explain. Once you see the exercise, you'll know what to explain to them, to what to expect. They're free to say no, they're free to stop at any time. If someone has trauma involving like physical abuse, I wouldn't use this exercise. Okay, so I'm gonna try to knock you over. We're gonna do this in two parts. So for the first part, you can bend your elbows, you can bend your knees. Okay, you're gonna put your hands up and I'm gonna try hitting them hard enough that I can knock you back, okay? And let's see, let me put the mic down and I'll try and explain loudly enough so you can all hear. Okay, so when I hit you, you're free to kind of let your hands move back. You can absorb the shock that way. Okay.
I was just gonna push you back.
Yeah, no, look at that. Okay, so I'm gonna start a little soft.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna get harder. I'm going about as hard as I can. I'm not as strong as he is. I know. Okay, I'm working up the sweat. It's not working. I can't knock you over. Okay, let's try another way. This time, you're gonna put your arms out, lock your elbows, you can't bend. Lock your knees, you can't bend those. Right? And I'm just gonna use, let's even try my pinky finger. We'll see if that works. Can't do that. You're bending your elbows. Okay, I'm gonna pick on him real quick so you can see how I would ask a client, right? So what was that like? What did you notice? What's coming up for you?
Yeah, I'm surprised at how easy it was not to be pushed over. When I was able to just I guess flexible is the word that comes to mind.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, so and then when I was stiff or rigid, it seemed like it was easy just to push me over with your pinky.
Yeah.
Except when I cheated.
And how can you testify how hard I was pushing the first time?
I think you were pushing really hard. I think like it was yeah, I definitely, if I was stiff or rigid, I would have flown across the room.
Okay. Thank you very much. You're good to go. Okay. What other connections or insights are y'all having with this exercise? Hopefully you're thinking about the issue you wrote down. How does this relate? What does it bring up?
That which you resist persists.
Yes, love that one. That which you resist persists. Good. So we're thinking about anxiety, we're thinking about compulsive sexual behavior, we're thinking about trauma, we're thinking about shame. That which we resist persists. And not only does it persist, but our whole life starts to revolve around it. We're so focused on checking in our head, is there anxiety? Is there anxiety? I have to get rid of anxiety. It's like the don't think about a pink polar bear, right? To know if you're not thinking about it, you have to think about it. And so it starts to define your life, okay? All right, here was the slide for that exercise. I'm not a catchy name. Can you stand it? You couldn't, unless it was flexible. Right, and so thinking about how are all of those techniques that you wrote down, that you've tried, how are they working for you? And if they're working for you, great. But if they're not, maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe it's time to drop the rope. And dropping the rope is scary because our brains really like to solve problems. And a lot of problems we can solve by working harder at them. Right? I think about one time our son was trying to open a package in the car and I was driving, so I couldn't help him. And I didn't think he was gonna be able to open it. It was, plastic things with toys inside are like impossible to open. Right? But he persisted and he kept trying and he tried different ways and pulling and tugging. He finally got it open. So that's a good example of a problem that the harder you work at it, the more success you'll have. Right? Problems with emotions, thoughts, memories, those operate a little bit differently. Where the more we struggle with them, it's like trying to hold on to wet soap. The tighter you hold, the more likely it is to slip out of your grasp. Okay, and I could go on. There's so many metaphors that work with this, right? Riding waves, jumping through them instead of trying to resist them. And there's some books I have at the end that have lists of all of these ACT metaphors. I think it's a really powerful way to teach. So now that we've established, okay, what I've been doing isn't working, it's costing me something, and it's making me tumble over with rigidity instead of flexibility. Now what do I spend my time and energy on? How do I know what to do once I've dropped the rope? Do I just stand at the edge of the cliff and stare at him? Like, what do I do? So here's a good question, and here's another spot where you can journal some notes for yourself or your client. Think about the conditions that you're hoping for. Imagine them being real. What if I had freedom from anxiety? What if I'd never been sexually abused? What if my depression was gone? Right? If I was free from that pain, okay? And if I knew that everyone in the world loved me, accepted me, cared for me, there's nothing I could do to lose their respect or love. And your brain will resist this, and your client's brain will resist this. But wait, but what? No, it's a hypothetical, let's sit with it. What would you spend your time on? Right? Instead of hustling to try and get people to love and accept you, what would you do? Instead of doing all the things on the list to try and get rid of your issue, playing that tug of war, what would you do? So I'll give you a second to jot down some notes. And I'd love to hear, if you're having reactions to this, You can share what you wrote down on your list if you'd like to, but also just what is the experience like for you of hearing this question and trying to answer it? Any thoughts or reactions here?
Befuddlement.
Befuddlement.
What would you really do with your time?
Yeah. What would you do? It really opens up something that many of us haven't considered. You can do different variations of this question, right? If you had unlimited money, right? So many of us, many of your clients and mine, right, we're struggling to meet the base of our pyramid, right? Getting enough food, getting shelter, right? So those needs need to be met, for sure. And so being able to say, okay, assume those needs were met. What would you spend your time on? The point of this question is to get clear on their individual values. It opens up this idea of, what do I want my life to be about? Okay, and the age group that I work with, right, I'm mostly with young adults, this is really developmentally relevant. Right? If you work with little kids, it's going to be mostly parental defined values, right? Teenagers, depending on their insight, you can do some good values work, and then young adults and on through the adult span, values work can be really, really powerful. Okay, so let me define what values mean in an ACT context. Okay. So this is a quote by Steve Hayes. He's one of the ACT big wigs, as it were. So he describes values as desired global qualities of ongoing action. Okay, so they're desired. They're something you want. They're not what your friends think you should be. They're not what your boss thinks you should be. They're not what your church or your parents or your spouse thinks you should be. They're what you authentically want your life to be about. Okay. Values are global qualities. They're qualities of action. They're not goals. They're not specific activities. Right? They're not specific people, right? Like some people try to say family, and you can make an argument either way for family being a value, but I would say, how do you want to show up with your family? That's the value, right? And it's about ongoing action. Okay, it's something that you can access at any time. So values are relatively stable and always accessible. So if a client is sort of saying, well, my values are this today, but I don't know, they'll be tomorrow, right? You might be tapping into like emotions rather than values, because emotions change pretty quickly. Mood can change fairly quickly, right? But values are relatively stable across the lifespan. There's definitely some shifting that can happen, redefining, clarifying, but they're always accessible, okay? So it's sort of like, I'll often compare values to directions on a compass, right? So value is like west. So if I have a value of, let's see, connection, right? Interpersonal connection, that's my west. Do I ever arrive at west? Like, I've made it, I'm west now. No, right? West is a direction that you head, and there may be little pit stops along the way, right? So the pit stops are our goals. The direction is our values. Okay, so if my value, what did I say it was? Connection, right? So pit stops might be when I get home from work, I have a goal to spend 5 to 10 minutes listening to my son. And that's a hard goal for me because, like many of you, by the time I get home, I'm about done listening. I've listened all day, right? But he is excited to see me and he wants to tell me about Minecraft. And I'm gonna listen, right? Because that is me moving towards my values. Now, I'm not gonna listen for an hour about Minecraft if I'm feeling burnt out, because another value is self-care, right? Is making my efforts sustainable. So I'm gonna also take care of my needs, right? But values can be an anchor to guide our actions, to guide our goals. And so if I'm going west and Disneyland's closed, right? Because there's like a pandemic or whatever. There's other destinations I can go that are west, right? Maybe I head to the Pacific Ocean, to the beach, because that's fresh air, so it's open and safe. So it gives us flexibility, right? Remember the rigidity versus flexibility. So if we're anchoring our lives or helping our clients anchor our lives in values, right, rather than getting rid of pain, there's more flexibility. If I have a value of health and I sign up to run a marathon and then I break my leg the week before, right, that's okay because I still made movement towards health, and now me taking care of my broken leg and letting it rest is still me moving towards health, right? So you can't be defeated when your life is anchored in values, because there's always a step you can take in that direction, even if it looks different than what you were hoping for. And it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to feel your feelings about it, right? But anchoring in values is really helpful. Questions so far? I'll leave time for questions at the end too, but I just want to check in. Yeah.
If you're working to go on a marathon, you break your leg, and your value is health, how do you help cope with that loss, that setback?
Yes. So that we're going to talk in a minute about mindfulness, about acceptance, about unhooking from painful thoughts and feelings, but still experiencing them, being present with them. So you're going to let yourself feel those feelings. So struggling with them is like, okay, I have to be okay with this. Dropping the rope is saying, wow, this sucks. I'm sad about it, and I wish this ogre wasn't here. And it's okay to feel sad about it, but I'm going to spend my energy moving towards my values and feeling my feelings instead of trying to get rid of them or make them go away. Does that answer the question? I think it's a really good question, and it's really going to vary person to person how we cope with that. Okay. So, this, I'm going to click, and it's going to look overwhelming, but you don't have to know what it is. This is just examples of values, okay? And so with clients, I have a printout of values that I'll give them, and for their homework, I'll have them go through it. First, just highlight everything that feels important, right? Everything that feels like them, everything that feels authentic. And they'll have, like 70 things, and then we'll try and narrow it down into categories. And the goal is to get down to maybe 5 to 7 core values. You can also do this in a specific context. So one of the groups that I run at BYU is for spouses or romantic partners of individuals who are struggling with compulsive sexual behavior, right? So it's often wives and girlfriends and fiancés of men who are compulsively using pornography, right? So I just have women in the room, and they're saying, how can I fix my husband? How can I change him? How can I get him to stop? How can I, change these things that I've tried changing and they're not changing, and I'm really sad about it, right? And when we do values work there, we'll say, okay, what are your values in the relationship, right? When you think about your, let's just say 10 or 25 year anniversary, how do you want to look back and say you showed up as a wife, as a partner? Right? I showed up with honesty. When I was hurting, I let him know. I also showed up with kindness. I showed up with is a good lead into values. And sometimes that's really empowering for these women, because then it gives them a direction to go that's not banging their head against the wall of trying to change another human. Okay. And then whether they choose to leave or stay in a relationship, they've become a person that they're proud of. They've moved in a direction that matters to them. Okay. All right, how are we doing on time? I think we're good. So, I think if I'm gonna come back to this or what. We'll touch on this right now. So this is a kind of an adaptation of a goal setting worksheet that Russ Harris put out. He's another ACT guru person. I really like this because clients often come in with goals, and sometimes the goals are really important to them, and our job is to help them reach that goal. And sometimes the goal might not be as helpful for them, and it's up to them to decide, right? But But asking this first question, what is the value that's behind this goal, can help with that flexibility, because then number one, the goal will matter to them more because they can see the why behind it. So instead of just, oh, I just have to stop doing this so that I don't hurt, well, there's a lot of hurt on the way to reaching your goal. Think about the most meaningful thing you've accomplished in your life, right? Was it free from pain? Was the road to accomplishing that thing easy and full of happy, positive emotions? Probably not. Hopefully there were some along the way. That's a wish that I have for you, but the most meaningful things in my life came with a lot of pain and struggle. But they were worth the pain and struggle because I could see the meaning behind them, or I could create a meaning behind them. So what's the value, right? What are the painful thoughts, or feelings, or memories, or sensations, or urges that I'll need to make space for if I'm gonna reach this goal? Another way of saying this is, what's gonna feel bad when I start? So I like hiking, and I do a little bit in the winter, but mostly I'm not super big into snow hiking. So when spring comes, I'm starting to hike again, and it's uncomfortable. My body's not used to climbing mountains that way. And it would be really easy to say, oh, I liked hiking at the end of the summer because it was hard, but it was mostly doable, right? But really I like hiking because I like stillness, I like nature, I like having time to contemplate, right? So when I start hiking and my muscles hurt and my heart is pounding in an uncomfortable way, it would be really easy to say, this isn't worth it, right? But if I say, okay, my goal is to hike this certain mountain, and I know it's going to be uncomfortable, I'm anticipating the painful feelings that are going to come up. And then this third step, how am I going to make space for those painful thoughts and feelings? Now I've got an actual plan that I'm less likely to give up on. And then starting small is always really helpful. I guess, I don't know why this isn't here twice. So then the question is, going back to that third step, how do I make space for the painful thoughts and feelings? This is where a lot of the work in therapy will come in. There's a ton of techniques that ACT has that help you do a couple things. One is notice without judgment, right? Another is unhook from painful thoughts and feelings. So it's not get rid of, it's unhook from. Right, so we'll do just a couple right now. So for noticing without judgment, a really good way to start doing this is breathing. Most of you probably have some experience with mindful breathing. So this won't be new to you, but today is a new day, and your body is what it is at this moment. You had a very specific breakfast today, the weather today, the conditions today, the room you're sitting in, the mask being uncomfortable, right? So we're gonna do this exercise and try and see it with fresh eyes, okay? So we're just gonna do a simple mindful breathing exercise. I'll guide you through for the first 20, 30 seconds, and then we'll spend about a minute to 2 minutes letting you just breathe, and then I'll have you come out of it. So feel free to close your eyes or find a fixed spot on the floor to gaze upon. And no need to change anything unless you want to, but just sort of notice your body posture. Notice how you're feeling, maybe a quick scan from head to toe or toe to head. And then most importantly, start to notice your breath. Just trying to be curious about it. Noticing the inhale, noticing the exhale. And paying attention to the various qualities, the temperature, the pace, the physical movement. What part of your body gets bigger? What part gets smaller? Where is there tension? Where is there release? Try and notice the moment right between inhale and exhale. There's just a brief moment in time where there's a switching. Same thing after an exhale, right before your body knows to inhale again. Keep noticing those moments, being curious and open. Maybe there's pain. Maybe it hurts to breathe. Maybe breathing brings awareness to parts of your body that have uncomfortable associations. Just noticing that. And then I'm going to be quiet for about 1 minute, and you'll just focus on your breath, and you'll notice thoughts coming and distractions coming. And when you notice those, you're just going to gently say, a distraction. And in a friendly way, bring your awareness back to your breath. Okay, so go ahead and do that for a minute. Okay, and you can bring your awareness back to the room. You can move, stretch, open your eyes, do whatever you need. I always feel like I need to stretch even if I wasn't the one doing the exercise. Okay. So what did you notice today? What came up in that exercise?
Really hard to turn off your thoughts.
It's really hard to turn off your thoughts. Amen. Yes. Brains think. That's what they do. Hearts pump, lungs breathe, and brains think. They're a little machine that makes thoughts on a conveyor belt like I Love Lucy, and they just keep coming, whether you're ready for them or not. Right? Great. That is noticing. You are now noticing, my brain makes these things, whether I want it or not. And as you start to do this noticing more, either on your own or with clients, you might also start to notice quality control isn't always great in my brain machine. Sometimes it makes stuff up. It just needs to get something out there, right? Sometimes it's nonfiction. Sometimes it's fiction. Sometimes it's kind of like creative nonfiction is most of my brain. It's like tweaking things, putting a little hue on it depending on how I'm feeling. Right, so you're noticing it's hard to turn off thoughts. Any other things you noticed during that exercise?
It wasn't hard for me to turn off thoughts. I wanted to go sleep. It was just close your eyes.
Great.
My body realized I'm tired.
Yes, ding, ding, ding. So her body gave her a message, right? Thoughts, the brain thinking machine was slowing down because her body was like, we need rest. Right? We need to prioritize something other than thinking right now. Right? So thoughts did not come easily. And that's really good information. How many of us go through our day exhausted, but on this weird sort of tired and wired autopilot? And then when we have a moment to do these exercises, we fall asleep, and that's great, right? We never want to shame a client for falling asleep during meditation, because that is their body giving them a very important message. Okay, so I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, any other noticing things that anyone wanted to share? Yes?
That moment between breaths is essentially the ultimate bomb. The body is constantly regulating your eyes. That just few milliseconds between inhalation and exhalation, your exercise
Yes, so he's talking about the moment between breaths, those few milliseconds where our body is just in calm. It just knows what to do, and there's just this space where we're not doing anything, but we are, right? There's this switch that's happening. Such a cool thing to notice. Yes?
I started noticing a lot of things I don't think about, like when the shoes feel on my feet, how I'm sitting, where like this counter is like pushing against my leg, which parts feel heavy, which parts feel light, my hair touching my forehead, like things you never think about, or just like all of a sudden very forefront of my mind.
Great. So he's noticing little sensations, little things about his shoes, the clothes, and hair that he wasn't noticing before. Perfect. Great. So this noticing, this is kind of a neutral way to get started with noticing some mindfulness activities. You can also do exercises with emotions, where you have someone notice the physical sensation of the emotion. Where is it? What shape is it? What color is it? Right? Is it a sort of animal? Is it something in nature? Is it moving? Is it still? Is it heavy? Is it sticky? Right? Trying to notice the emotion. That's a way to make space for the emotion. It's not, I gotta watch Netflix because I can't feel anxious. It's saying, wow, I'm noticing anxiety right here, and it feels tight and twisty. Right? And I'm feeling butterflies right here in my belly. Right? Wow, interesting. Right? Or sometimes I'll have clients do meditation where we notice those feelings and we practice taking breaths, and you imagine your body is like an infinite balloon that can expand with each breath, and notice what it's like to make more space for those feelings. And practice saying things like, hey, anxiety, you're welcome here. Right? Or, hey, sexual urges, feeling turned on, you're allowed to be here. Right? It's okay to have sexual thoughts and feelings. The thoughts and feelings themselves are not dangerous. They're just part of me, and they're just one part of me. So that's part of this noticing, and it leads really well into this unhooking. So thinking about, we've got these rose-colored glasses. Our thoughts and our feelings are like lenses that we wear that color the way we see everything. Unhooking is not trying to throw the glasses in the trash. It's taking them off once in a while and just being like, interesting, I'm seeing through pink right now. I wonder if I can put it in my pocket for a few minutes and see what that's like. And then I'll put them on again, and I'll put them off again. Right. There's a lot of really helpful techniques for unhooking. I don't have time to go into all of them, but the books that I'll reference at the end have just long lists. But here's some simple examples. Right. So when a client or looking at your list of that painful situation, and they come in with a thought like, let's just say nobody loves me. Nobody will ever love me. Right? That's a really painful thought. And so having them insert the phrase, I'm having the thought that no one loves me. Or I'm having the feeling of shame. I'm telling the story that no one loves me. My brain is telling the story that no one loves me. Those are all examples of unhooking. There's also meditation exercises. If anyone's ever heard of leaves on a stream, right? That's an example of this unhooking. You picture a tree with leaves falling and the leaves floating away downstream. And you put your thoughts on it, on each leaf. And you just watch it float by. And then the same thought comes, you put it on the next leaf, and that's another way to practice this unhooking. Right? So it's a way to say, I can have any thoughts and feelings I want, and I'm still in charge of my actions. And I can choose to live my values, or to take a tiny baby step towards my values, even when I'm in pain. And hopefully our clients have some values of compassion or kindness towards themselves, because then that gives us a really nice way to build in some self-care into that baby step of values. Right. Okay, let me see if there was another that I was gonna do. You can also do a lot of silly things. So thinking about like Harry Potter, you know that, I always forget, what are those things called? The Boggarts? You know what I'm saying? They take the form of your worst fear. And what's the spell that gets rid of them? Ridiculous. I'm probably saying it wrong. But you cast this spell, so there's this demon, and it takes the form of your worst fear. You cast a spell that makes it look funny, and then you can deal with it, right? And then it's doable. So doing silly stuff is super fun. It also breaks up the day as a therapist. That's why I like working with kids, because you have to be silly sometimes and it's not so heavy all the time. But saying it in a silly voice, right? Having your client say, "Nobody loves me," in a Donald Duck voice. Now do it in an opera voice. Now do it like a mouse. Now do it with a British accent, right? And if you have terrible accents, even better, because then it's even funnier, right? Putting it to the words of a popular song. I had a group recently, I was leading an anxiety group. We were talking about this, and they all wanted to sing everything to the tune of Wrecking Ball from Miley Cyrus. It was very effective. It was a really fun group, just people singing over Zoom all of their fears to the tune of Wrecking Ball. Right, so being silly, you can use a computer, and you know those like really cheesy word art effects where it's like an arch and like a shadow, and right, you can change the color, the font, the size. You could write the thought and copy and paste it 5 million times until it looks like gibberish. Right, so anything you can do to play with the thoughts, play with the feelings, get some space from them, but still honoring them and making space, right? So those are some other examples of unhooking. Okay, so to summarize, what I hope my clients come away from therapy with is the ability to be present, to be present in their life, to open up, to stop struggling with things, to make space for painful thoughts and feelings, to feel things that are hard to feel, right? And to do what matters. Identify their personal values and to make steps in that direction. It looks very different from client to client, like any theoretical orientation, right? You're really going to adapt to the specific case. Some people are really clear on their values, and they just need a few mindfulness techniques to get there. Some people spend the whole treatment length figuring out values, right? Like the word earlier, befuddling. Like, I don't know what to do. How do I figure out what's important to me? Okay. So here, this next slide is the only place where I really get into like the theory. So this is called the ACT hexaflex. Right? There's these 6 components to it, right? And I'll go through each of them. But the underlying goal is psychological flexibility. Okay. So we'll start with acceptance, right? So this is like that balloon we talked about, right? Being able to accept, this is my reality, this is how I feel, right? I have experienced trauma, or I have borderline personality disorder, or I struggle with compulsive sexual behaviors. Right? Acceptance, making space for the reality and the internal, right? That experiential inner acceptance. Diffusion, the longer term for this is cognitive diffusion. That's the unhooking we talked about, right? So another metaphor is like a parade. When you're sitting, right, 4th of July, looks like they're gonna have the parade again, maybe. I haven't checked the news, but I saw something about it. So you're sitting on the sidelines, and all of these floats go by, and all of these marching bands and cheerleaders and all kinds of things. And if you don't like a float, you can just let it pass by, right? It wouldn't make sense to get up off of your lawn chair and hop on the float and ride it to the end of the parade, being like, I hate this one, I hate this one. Right? But that's what we do with painful thoughts and feelings. We're like, I can't feel this. And then we end up struggling with it, and we end up riding it instead of just trusting it will pass. If I wait long enough, painful things will pass. Right? So that's that diffusion. Okay, self as context. This is being able to notice the part of you that is noticing. So a common metaphor is you are the sky, your thoughts and feelings are the weather. There's no weather that's big enough to break the sky. The sky is always open for business. And the weather can be painful, it can cause damage, it can be hard. Right? But we know if we wait long enough, the weather will eventually change. So helping clients get in touch with that part of them that's the sky. This is a great place to integrate spirituality if you have spiritual clients. Getting a sense of like, what do you believe is your core self? Have you always existed? Right? What is that part of you that's always been there and that will always be there? Right? Whether they believe in a life after this one or whether it's just during this life, there's a part of you that's been consistent. So that's the self as context. Right? Contact with the present moment, mindfulness, getting a lot of those techniques practiced. Values, we talked about the compass, helping them identify that. And then committed action. So this running, this is another metaphor I haven't talked about yet. But being able to notice the difference between running towards and running away. So think about running, whether you enjoy it or not. Right? Imagine that you are at the airport and this long lost family member or friend or loved one has come to visit, pandemic's over, everything's safe. You see them and you're just so excited, you both start running towards each other so that you can embrace. Think about what the running feels like in that moment. And now imagine that you're walking home and you live in a neighborhood where there's like fences and gates by each house and grass and stuff. And there's a dog that starts chasing you. And you're like, oh, I'm just a block from my house. If I run fast enough, I can get behind the gate before the dog gets me, right? So you're running away from this dog and it's snarling and barking. And you're just like, I just gotta get home. I gotta get away from the dog, right? Think about what the experience of running is like in that situation. Let me take a couple of comments here. What is the difference between running away from the dog versus running towards a loved one? How does the experience change?
It's the intent and the emotion behind it.
The intent and the emotion behind it. Great, yes.
I would say control. I want to run towards something and force to run away from something.
Yeah, so control comes into play, right? Choice of what you're running towards, where this dog just sort of showed up and you felt like you have to get away from it. But you didn't ask for the dog to come. Great. Other thoughts about the difference? So this is where you might look at that list you created at the very beginning of all of the efforts that you've put into changing or getting rid of or eliminating this issue. And you might look at them and say, which one of these are running from a dog and which one of these could be running towards someone I love, right? So going back again to the sexual concern group that I lead, many people in the group, right, we're at BYU, it's a religious school, many people in the group have tried praying in order to get rid of their problem. Right? And for many of them, prayer has become sort of loaded because it's just a reminder of how ashamed they feel, of how sinful they think they are, how bad they've internalized their sense of self to be. Right? And so prayer has become sort of loaded, something they do as like penance to try and get rid of guilt, running away from the fear of badness. And it doesn't mean that just because prayer didn't work to get rid of all of their sexual thoughts and feelings, doesn't mean prayer can't be a meaningful part of their life. But it will take some reframing of like, well, what is the thing I'm running towards? As I take committed action towards my values, right? What is the value that makes prayer meaningful for me? And we'll always have multiple motivations, right? It's not ever as simple as it sounds in like a 50-minute conference presentation, right? But being able to help clients or help yourself start to identify, am I just doing this out of fear or shame? And is it possible to sprinkle in a little bit of a value? And there may be some things that drop out of your life entirely, and that's fine too. But a lot of them might be like running, where you're gonna do it either way, but you wanna try and change the experience of it. Okay. So this is the gist, the theory behind ACT. There's a lot of other theory behind it as well. So if you're into theory, read a book by Steve Hayes. He loves getting into all of that. I really like the practical side of it, the experiential side of it. So, I guess questions about this before, the next couple slides are just books. So questions about the Hexaflex or just anything we've talked about so far. Okay, so I'll show you a couple of my favorite books. So this is for clinicians. So if you're trying to learn how to do ACT, I put them in order from left to right of what I think the importance is. So if you can only start with one place, ACT Made Simple is, for me, is by far the easiest to read, the most relevant, the most, you can implement it right away. Right? There's lots of exercises and experiential stuff in it. Then this big book of ACT metaphors, it is what it's called. Right? So it just has a bunch of metaphors, and metaphors are just so core to ACT because it really promotes client autonomy with interpretation. There's multiple levels that they can work on, right? And then this last one, getting unstuck in ACT, is kind of like a troubleshooting guide. Like, okay, this hasn't worked, or what do you do when you come across this issue? So these are my favorite books for clinicians. And then as far as for individuals, I like to recommend 2 clients. So Russ Harris has written both of these books on the left, The Happiness Trap. So the one on the far left is the illustrated version. It's like a kind of like a graphic novel, comic book type thing. The one in the middle is just text. It's the same content. So you're just, if you have someone who doesn't love reading, you're going to give them the illustrated version, which is by far the most recommended book in my office. And then if someone really likes reading or doesn't like little cutesy cartoons, the middle one's good. This book, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, this is really good for people who are very heady, who like a lot of wordiness, and it's like a workbook where you journal a bunch of stuff. I hardly ever recommend it because most people don't have time for that. So, like I said, Steve Hayes is a lot more theory dense, and Russ Harris is user-friendly. Russ Harris also has a series of videos about ACT on YouTube for free. So if you look at any of the metaphors in these books, and you can just Google, right? So passengers on the bus. Thoughts and feelings are like passengers on a bus, but we decide where the bus goes, right? You can Google passengers on a bus, ACT metaphor, or Russ Harris, and a video pops up that you can show to clients. So they're all 2 to 5-ish minutes. So I don't have any links, so maybe I should put those in, but these are the other resources. Okay, so that's all I've got for today. We have a couple minutes, we have a few minutes for questions or comments if anyone has those. Yes?
I know they have been using this up at the state hospital. I'm wondering have you used it with any severely, with people with schizophrenia and very serious delusions? Can it work for that?
That's a great question. So the question is about severe mental illness, schizophrenia, delusions, things like that, and how relevant ACT is. Because of the populations I work with, I don't actually know the answer to that. So if others have information about that, I'd love for you to speak up. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Fine, I'll do it myself.
I could guess, I could speculate, which is that this idea of unhooking, this idea of making space for the possibility that something's not literally true but still present in your mind could be really helpful for someone experiencing psychosis or delusions or things like that. I think mindfulness, there's a ton of evidence that just being present with your body, connected to your body, is really helpful for a wide range of issues. So my guess is that it would still be helpful, but I don't know enough to say for sure. Other questions? Yes?
I want to know a little bit more about the stuff as context. My mind went to the place of internal family systems and the self in that. That's something that maybe context. I know there are maybe a little bit of description of what's deeper, self is not black or how we make it.
Yeah, so the question is about self as context and using, internal family systems as an idea of self and just wanting more explanation of how this plays out in ACT. So in the ACT Made Simple book that I showed, the one for clinicians, there's a really extended meditation that I think is one of the best explanations for self as context. And in the meditation, the person leading it asks you to think of a feeling that you're having. Notice the feeling, and then notice yourself noticing the feeling. If you can notice the feeling, then you are not the feeling. Right? And then you think of a memory, right? And what that experience was like, maybe something in childhood, and notice yourself noticing it. If you can notice the memory, then you are not the memory. And it repeats that process over and over with a bunch of different things. And it just uses that phrase, if you can notice this, you are not this. So it's helpful for for those of us or clients where we get really hooked in to some struggle or some issue and feel like this defines me, this is me, and it's freeing up to say, there is a me that has always been and always will be, and these things will come and go, and I will experience them, but I am not them just because I experience them. I will say self as context is probably the hardest for people to wrap their heads around, which is why I don't use the hexaflex with clients, because it gets like real fuzzy. But anytime you can help them draw awareness to the fact that there is a deeper them that is different or bigger or separate from their struggles, you're accessing self as context. Does that answer the question? Sort of.
I think it helps you understand how to move away all the things that they are not.
Yes. And then the question remains of how do you identify what they are? That you can use lots of therapeutic stuff for that. I mean, again, if they have a religious belief system, you can ask, what do you believe about the self? Right? And helping them kind of define that for themselves. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
And your experience then, what is the final product of some of your clients, after they've gone through this and worked through the process?
Yeah, so the question is, what's the final product after clients have gone through ACT and presumably have some success with it? The final product is they're engaged in their life, they're focusing their energy on things that matter to them, and they still have pain, but it either becomes less intense because they're not struggling with it and making it worse by the struggle, or they're just able to live a meaningful life with it. So for example, the young men I work with who struggle with pornography, for many of them, they'll focus on, okay, what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of spouse or friend or student do I want to be? They're spending a lot more energy on building themselves up spiritually instead of counting days, instead of rehashing every quote unquote relapse over and endlessly and ad nauseum and going into their bishop every, bazillion times a week to talk about it. And so their life looks like what they want it to look like. And the paradox is that for most of these men that I work with, and women as well, we have a group just for women, for most of them, they end up viewing less sexual imagery and less frequently than before. But that's not the focus. The focus is on building a meaningful life, but when we move towards something, we naturally move away from stuff that doesn't fit. For some of them, they may still struggle with it. For a very small percentage, they decide, actually, I'm okay with consuming ethically sourced pornography, and they do it in a very intentional way that fits with their sexual values that they've identified. And for others, it doesn't fit with their values, but they don't lose themselves in self-loathing and shame every time they do engage in compulsive sexual behavior. And their spouses see a difference and say, oh, he used to disappear in shame and I couldn't access him, and we couldn't connect. And now that his shame is lower, he's able to connect with me. We have a richer marriage, even though he occasionally engages in these behaviors that both of us feel are against our values. Does that answer the question? Okay, let's go ahead and end here. Thanks everyone, and I'm glad to stick around if you have questions.
Thanks for being my buddy.
Where are you going? We got a whole closing presentation downstairs.
Really?
We could sneak out.
We really do?
I will be back in Texas. So